Welcome to One Bills Lite, the full-court press version of our daily show, One Bills Live. We're here to cram in as much Bills and NFL content as we can in about 40 minutes. In this episode, Steve and I delve into the keep-their-own approach to the Bills in free agency. The numbers game uses some Bills draft history. NFL Executive VP of Football Operations Troy Vincent joins us to talk live in-person NFL draft, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the NFL, and some possible rules changes. And we take a look at Buffalo's quarterback contingent in Something's Gotta Give. Hut, hut!
Tasker, touchdown, Buffalo. And it's Steve Tasker who has been all over the field.
Kind of unique. He was kind of a dual-role player for you. Steve! A balloon. Steve! A blimp? We're not even in the stratosphere of normalcy here. Good to be with you here on One Bills Lite. Chris Brown here, Steve Tasker there. And Steve, the free agency wave for the Bills has seemingly crested. And while I don't think by any means that Buffalo is officially done tinkering with their roster, it appears as though the focus of the front office has steadily shifted to the draft as we creep up on April.
Yeah, it's not going to be much longer before they're going to have a full complement of players head to training camp in the offseason. Now, there may still be, even after the draft and after free agency wraps up, and even after one of the off-season get-togethers, maybe one of the if they do virtual or if they do in-person, in-house stuff and they get out on the field, they may tinker with the roster even more, release a couple of guys and bring a couple of guys on. But you're talking about the bottom of the roster going to training camp, and pretty much it's going to be set. I think this, for the first time under the Sean McDermott regime, you're not going out wholesale changing a position group.
Yeah.
Certainly there's going to be a couple of new faces on the defensive line rotation, but you're talking about 2 out of 8 guys. So with F.A. Obata coming in and the departure of Trent Murphy and
Quentin Nelson Quentin Jefferson.
Starlo Tulele back in the fold. They'll probably bring one more guy in there at least. So for the first time, Sean McDermott has, I think, kind of the roster he'd like to head forward with.
Yeah, and the cap situation is part of this too. We saw earlier in the week that the Bills created some more cap space by picking up the option bonus in Tre'Davious White's contract that basically guarantees the final year of his deal in 2025, but also creates cap space this year for them. That was in the contract from the beginning when he signed the extension last summer. The Bills doing that, knowing they were in the midst of a pandemic, there were going to be revenue losses, so this was a thing they put into Tre'Davious White's contract and Deion Dawkins' contract, for that matter, as fail-safes to create cap space in anticipation of a possible reduction of the salary cap. That's, in fact, what happened. So they created the cap space, but I'm wondering if it's primarily with the idea of being able to sign their draft class, because according to overthecap.com, Spot Track, those 2 great sites that really keep track of all of this, they have the Bills at about $8 million under the cap, and most draft classes are going to need $8 to $10 million to be signed by their respective clubs. Right. Fortunately for the Bills, they're drafting late in most of the rounds, so their numbers will be a little bit lower than the teams drafting in the top 10, but that gives indication that, for all intents and purposes, any big things going on in free agency will not involve the Bills, unless they take some drastic measures with the roster. And Brandon Beane said, Steve, not to expect any big splashes, and there weren't any, in terms of new additions. Where would you rank, though, the Emmanuel Sanders and Jacob Hollister additions in terms of potential impact on the offense?
Well, I'm all about it because this is an offense that throws it first. And, I've said that looking to improve the running game for this offense is looking for a wart on Miss America. I mean, this offense was humming. They scored more points than any offense in Bills history.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be fixed. If you can hone it and change it and sharpen it up and do some financial things like trade John Brown, basically, functionally, you traded John Brown for Emmanuel Sanders. All about it. It's great. I don't think you need to think about, and Hollister, same thing. Tyler Kroft, Jacob Hollister, okay. great. You need to keep humming offensively. And I think it's a nod towards what this team knows it's going to be able to do. They're going to score points. Now, certainly, they scored 29.5 points on average last year. That's a ton.
Yeah.
That's a ton. If they can stay there or even tick it up a couple of notches or even down a notch or two, they're going to still be fine over the long haul of a season. So they know they've got their offense about where they need it. And putting those players in are going to be able to if they get into a tight spot with injuries or whatever, they're going to be deep enough and have enough quality veteran backups and guys who can move around and continue to hum along offensively. I love the signings. Emmanuel Sanders, I think, is going to make a bigger impact than Hollister will. I don't know that Hollister has it in him to beat Dawson Knox out of the lineup, but maybe. If he does, that's all the better. It just means you're that much better.
This is what I like about Hollister. What Hollister does for this offense is he diversifies it because of his own versatility. When Lee Smith came on the field, for the most part, you knew what that meant. Okay? Blocking guy, inline guy, essentially like a sixth offensive lineman. Yes, he would leak out and surprise some people in the red zone, caught a couple of touchdown passes. That was great. Hollister can do just about everything out there on the field. Now, he is not an elite tight end by any means, but I think he's good at just about everything you ask of a tight end, and I think that gives Brian Daboll options. And when you think about the offense, yes, as you said, supremely successful last year, but Daboll is a tinkerer. He always likes to tweak things, change things just a little bit so the opponent can't get a read on him. Those opponents are poring over Bills' offensive film all offseason. We know that. I think Hollister gives Brian Daboll an extra tool in his toolbox to move around the field in a multitude of ways, even with Knox on the field together, that could diversify this offense even further going forward. That's what excites me about it.
They may like Hollister on the field a lot more than they like Tyler Kroft. Kroft certainly took over for Dawson Knox, but those two guys were rarely on the field together. And certainly they didn't go 13 personnel. That's with three tight ends and a wide out.
They were too much of the same thing.
Yeah, but they were so successful doing what they were doing. They were really heavy in certain personnel combinations, the 4 wide and 3 wide. Now, the 4 wide kind of went away when John Brown went away for 5 or 8 games. But the 3 wide was still their bread and butter. I mean, they just never went away from it. So I think this year they're going to have to come up with something they can be just as productive in, if they can, with different personnel, because they've got to be more diversified. Because when you start to, put the same people out there every week, you start to get predictable, and that's one thing that's a death knell in the NFL. And predictability.
To this point, we haven't seen an addition at cornerback. Levi Wallace was brought back into the fold, but we haven't seen an addition at cornerback or at offensive tackle, which would seem to leave those as positions of priority in the draft. Not a position emergency per se, but certainly a priority, right?
Yeah, they still need some depth at corner, even if it's just depth, even if it's just a warm body with a pulse. They just need some guys. Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson are not enough. You're going to have another guy to compete with those guys and to be in the fold, or somebody that can play corner and safety or corner and nickel. So you've got to get some more bodies out there. Tre'Davious White, and that's given the fact that hopefully Tre'Davious White doesn't get nicked, right? So, they need some more quality people outside and opposite Tre'Davious White to take the field, I think, in this. And I think that's really defensively, I think that's what you're looking at. I think every place else, I think they feel really good about their ability to take the field and go. Certainly we may see them draft a D lineman, a linebacker, or a corner, but that doesn't mean they expect those guys to come in and plug in and play.
And then just with respect to offensive tackle, as we've discussed on our daily show, One Bills Live, they need a swing tackle.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect spot.
Yeah, Ryan Bates can play tackle, but I think his ideal position is probably guard. And so I don't know if you want to turn to that kind of a player. Nothing against Ryan Bates. I think he's a good player. I just don't know if tackle is his calling card. And so I would expect them to try to find one of those as well. And if your swing tackle is coming in the draft, Steve, that's got to be somebody on the first 2 days, because it's got to be somebody you feel confident is going to be able to step in and hold the fort if one of your starters is out.
I think more than likely they'll still sign a tackle in the free agency.
It's possible.
And they'll wait until the guy just says, you know what, I want someplace to play.
Yeah,
I'm
the
gonna
cost
take
is
it.
coming down.
Like a Villanueva from
he's still
from
out there.
Pittsburgh, still out there. That would be a perfect guy because you're not expecting him to come in and play 16 games. He's long in the tooth, but he's got a lot of leadership qualities. He's got a ton of experience. He comes with a big body. If you could talk him into saying, hey, come out, finish your career up here, stay ready, teach our young guys how to play, and enjoy the ride. If you want one more year in the league, we can give it to you. And that kind of guy would be what they're looking for, and that would be perfect.
Time for our numbers game, Steve. And this week, we turn the page to the NFL draft, and we delve into a little bit of Bills draft history concerning round one choices. Since 1980, Steve, the Bills have drafted 20th or later in round one, a total of 16 times. This will be the 17th time this year. They pick 30th, as you know. I need you to tell me the three most popular position groups of Buffalo's draft choices with those 16 selections that took place at pick 20 or later in round one.
Bottom third of the
Are you
draft.
ready?
Yep.
Let's fire up the music. Here we go.
All right,
Numbers
here we go.
game this week. Give
Most
me the
popular position group when the Bills picked late in the draft, first round.
Give me the three most popular. I'll take the top three positions.
Okay, I'm going to say running back.
Running back is number 2 on the list. 4 times the Bills have taken running backs after pick 20 in round one.
I'm going to say wide receiver.
Wide receiver is not in the top 3. That was only once. Eric Moulds in 1996. It was a good one.
Let's say, I'll say offensive line. Do I have to be specific? Guard or tackle?
Offensive line is correct. 3rd on the list.
So
3
it's
times
running back,
that happened.
Offensive line. And
Will Wolford was one in 86. Right. Eric Wood in 2009. Now I got to see if I can remember the other one.
Reuben Brown?
No, he was too high. He was pick 14. This is pick 20 or later. Oh, John Fina. John Fina was the 3rd one. John Fina.
John Fina. I will say offensive line, wide receiver. I'm going to say corner.
Cornerback is correct. This was the means by which I came up with this because I said to myself, what have the Bills picked most often when they're picking late in round one? And since 1980, they have chosen a cornerback 5 times. 5!
Let me see. Can I
let's take a shot at this. Let's see how many of these guys you can get. I don't think. Hold on.
We might have been too good when we picked
Nate Odoms. I have to double check because he might have been like pick 29, but it was in the second round then. I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't have the list in front.
I'll say Nate Clemens.
Nate Clemens is correct. I know that's right.
Derek Burrows.
I'm not 100% sure, but he was late in the first round or early second
Henry
round.
Jones.
Henry Jones was listed as a corner, but he played safety, so I didn't really count him. But if you do count him, it's 6, not 5 times.
I'll say wow, that's a good one. This is a better question.
I know 2 others for sure
Nate Clemens.
off the top of my head.
Let's see. Corner. Oh, Antoine Winfield.
Antoine Winfield is correct.
McKee. I'm sorry. I can't remember the kick returner's name. What was his name?
The kick returner.
Our kickoff returner for the Buffalo Bills.
Terrence McGee. He was a 4th round pick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, he was a find. How about that?
There's one more that I know for sure. 1st round draft.
I can't remember anymore.
He was even a Tasker's teammate.
Really?
Yeah. He's going to his list.
All right. Wasn't Dwight Drain, Henry Jones. Let's say
recent one. Go closer to the bottom of your list.
Kirby Jackson.
Not Kirby Jackson.
Who is it? Hold on. I might not put him on a list. Hold
Jeff
on.
Burris.
Jeff Burris. Okay,
Yeah.
where's Jeff Burris? Where's on my list?
He should be on there. You better put him on because he was a Tasker's teammate. As you know, he was not all too happy that it took a long time for you to guess him. If you remember.
Now I left him off my list again. I love that kid too, and I've totally disrespected him in our podcast.
Yeah, Nate Clements, Jeff Burris, Antoine Winfield. I have to double check on some of these. I should have brought the list in with me. I only brought the numbers game list, so that's a bad on me. I will try to run through that list in the next episode of the podcast. So in case people are wondering, we can rattle that off to them. But yeah,
good
cornerback.
stuff.
And as I have said on our show, I think it could happen again.
Yeah, I think
it could happen again.
I think it very well might. And I think it's going to be that corner position, or I think it's going to be a big guy, an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Certainly if there's an edge rush. No, there's no edge rushers for 30.
There might be, because the quarterbacks are going to push some talent down, and there aren't too many elite pass rushing talents in this draft.
Right.
So now it becomes different strokes for different folks, and between 15 and 30, there can be a lot of variance of grades.
Do you think though they're going to do that again? Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa.
I don't think so.
I don't either.
I don't think so.
I don't know. We'll see.
But
we don't know anything.
Maybe on the first 2 days, though.
Maybe.
Get another one.
Maybe.
You got two guys that are long in the tooth in Addison and Hughes.
There's no way they'd take one of the Etienne or Najee Harris, because those guys will be there at 64.
I wouldn't think so.
Those guys will be there later.
But this is a question that we'll have to ask Brandon Beane if we get him on before the draft, which will be, do your priorities shift at all when you feel you're this close in terms of your draft approach? Like, do you take a swing and take a chance on a running back in round one?
I don't know.
If you really feel like it's an over-the-top move. I don't know.
I don't
if you
think
do that.
you can't deviate from what got you here. It's going to help you.
I agree, but it's still a question we need to ask.
Right.
All right, good stuff, Steve. Makes you wonder if history will repeat itself this spring, with the Bills currently holding the 30th overall pick. Time now for our very interesting discussion with NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Troy Vincent, who covers a wide range of issues that the league is dealing with right now. Here is Troy Vincent. Troy, good to see your face. Good to talk to you. And I guess we should start with the news that the league released today. NFL Draft is going to take place in Cleveland. It looks like it's the virtual days of the draft, at least, are partially over.
Well, let me begin by just saying, you two are some of my favorite people, two of my favorite people.
Oh, wow, look at that. He's laying it on thick early here, Steve.
No, I just want to say, Chris, you were an intricate part of kind of who I was and what I did in the community when I was a Bill. And just, Steve, just the respect that I have for you as a player, as a legend, in Miami, watching you dominate us for many years. Thanks for having me again. The draft, yes, it's here. And there were some things that we learned last year from a virtual standpoint that we'll incorporate this year. But the plans are to have a live event. I began reaching out to prospects to see if it's something that they wouldn't mind joining us and us celebrating their collegiate careers, and as we look towards the future stars. So we're looking forward to going to Cleveland.
One thing is, since you're laying it on thick for us, let me just say this. I got to congratulate. I don't know how much you've heard of this. I think it was one of the great accomplishments in American sports for you guys to get 256 regular season games in during the global pandemic and the playoffs and the Super Bowl. Certainly there were some snafus and some hiccups along the way, but to get all 256 games in, what was the attitude in the office there at Park Avenue in the office when you guys got all those games in? You had to take a great deal of pride in that.
Yes, and I would say it began with teamwork. When people talk about like the values of our game and what the values, what does the game do? I saw teamwork, Steve, at its best. I saw people working together for a common interest. That's the player, that's the coach, that's the principal owner, that's the Players Association. We were just aiming towards, hey, we got to be flexible. Don't ever take it personal. It's not going to be equal. We talk about equity all the time. And we have to follow the science. And that's really like, okay, what's the barometer? We begin every discussion. What's the medical community saying? How can we apply that to our daily business? And I would just say the teamwork. And Dr. Seals, Jeff Miller, Dawn Aponte, who works directly with myself. And Larry Verrazani, I've shared this with the commissioner and others all the time. It does not happen. They were the glue to getting 17 games. 256 games in 17 weeks. Every week we had to adjust, and we did it. I compliment the players, the coaches. Everyone had to remain flexible. I got worried maybe once or twice that we were running out of options as we saw the infection take place in different cities. Okay, as we started marching towards week 13, we start losing some of our options and flexibility on schedule, but we did it. Got to the playoffs and had a fabulous Super Bowl.
How was it, Troy? Maybe just take us behind the scenes a little bit in some of those moments that raised the level of stress in dealing with pivoting from and reacting to some of the things that the virus was doing in various NFL cities. Like, did you guys just have Dr. Sills on speed dial? This guy, like,
he lived with all of us. He lived with all of us. He was on speed dial, Zoom dial, you call it. And Chris, I would say this. We started off one way. And as the season progressed, week 3 or 4, the contact tracing, we didn't have that figured out early on. But I believe once we realized how the contact tracing worked inside of the system, the process, once we were able to identify, isolate, and contain possible spread, then we were able to move forward with scheduling a game. Once we got those 3 areas down, we knew it. That process took about 6 weeks into the regular season. But once we got it, again, identify the problem, isolate the problem, then contain it. Now we were able to schedule games.
And now with the season that has happened, you got moved into the off season. Free agency has gone off without a hitch so far. Now you're looking at the draft. How is the 17th game? What kind of curveball has that made, if any, for the scheduling, for facility availability? Stadiums, the equity of an odd number of games. How is that? How's that formulated?
No eyeball, Steve. I look at it as just from my view now, and I'm thinking back as a former player. It actually presents some opportunities here. One, some flexibility, maybe on the international front. But I like the idea of being able to create some competitiveness inside the conference. Being able to schedule some games the schedule doesn't allow us to do in 16 games. But there's some matchups I think that we all would like to see in conference that I believe the 17 game, that flexibility, it allows us to do so. Again, the odd number, we'll just deal with that. I do believe eventually we'll get to potentially even making that even. But I believe both the players, obviously the fans, this is a win-win for all. Club ownership, players, fans. I think it'd be good for the game. I really do.
And then just with respect, Troy, and you may not be able to answer this because there's not enough information for the league to make a decision yet, but just with respect to OTAs and mini camps, which we all know were fully virtual last year, it still doesn't look like it's come into complete focus in terms of what you'll be able to and not to do because we're dealing with a national vaccination rollout. We know that 20 and 30-somethings are not going to be high on the vaccination list, so we may very well get to April and May and even June, and there might still be an awful lot of players out there who have not been vaccinated. Are there certain things, bars you guys are trying to clear before you can say, you know what, we can have an in-person OTA schedule or an in-person June minicamp schedule?
Well, that conversation is a daily conversation. I had an opportunity to participate at least last week's call with Chairman Mara, Commissioner Goodell, and D and J.C. Treader to talk about, okay, what does phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 look like? Always following the science. I think Dr. Sills has taught us all that we're still in a pandemic. And there were things that worked last offseason from a virtual standpoint. So what's the integration? Being reasonable and responsible. We saw it work last year. There were elements that work. We're in a different place now. Vaccinations are now increasing. We're seeing hospitalization rates are now decreasing. What can we do to be responsible, both for the organization, the players, the staffs that are there, coming back in, the rookies, the veterans. So that's a daily conversation. I think it'll be resolved here fairly quickly. But when I say both sides, meaning Chairman Mara, D, Commissioner Larry Verasani, the teams are working. Hey, let's try to be reasonable and responsible, getting the guys back at work. We do know one thing: the club facilities are the safest places for the men to work out. Many are coming in now to rehab. The clubs, the coaches, the players, they don't want to be off-site working out. Let's get them into a secure facility, which we've seen works over the last year, and see if we can put some things together to get the guys back into the facility to get prepared for this next run.
I know with everything else on your plate with the COVID and trying to get guys, like you say, all these things, these extra layers of difficulty that you guys have to navigate through. What about the old things that we always worry about in the offseason, like rule changes? And we've heard rumors that they're going to consider a sky judge for these games. What's on front and center? What's on the front burner for that stuff?
Well, tomorrow we actually complete our committee report. So we have our final competition committee call. It's been interesting. From the booth official, that was a proposal that was submitted by the Baltimore Ravens of a booth judge. We think we're in a good place with replay and the administration of replay. There's been we see Philadelphia submitted the 4th and 15. So we've had some interesting, as we always do, that the committee vets. And this is where I love, Steve, I love the democratic process. And the Bills had a resolution that they proposed about moving the hiring cycle towards to after Super Bowl play or after the championship run. So there's a different opinions of why we should, why we shouldn't. I just find it interesting. The one thing that I'm proud of each of the proposals that have come in, both from the club and from the committee, is the possible elimination of the cut block. And that's something that our medical staff, Dr. York and his committee and the BioCore team, trying to reduce unnecessary risk. That mobile block, that blocking in space creates the unnecessary risk that we don't want, one, from a head and neck injury standpoint and lower extremity injuries. So seeing that as a former player and being able to appreciate taking things out of game that just people, it's just not good for the game to see that proposal being submitted by our coaches subcommittee and the competition committee and the efforts that we've made eliminating the blind side block. We look at kickoff return, the better helmets, the elimination of the cut block in the box, which we'll see and we'll discuss. That tackle to tackle box, eliminating that, and then out in space, so you can still cut inside of that tackle box, but in space, eliminating that. That's good for the bigs as well as the guys on the back end.
Talking to NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Troy Vincent. And Troy, I know you've kind of been front and center in playing a role with the diversity and inclusion initiatives in the league. And we saw at least some measure of traction at the GM level. Martin Mayhew, Brad Holmes, Terry Fontenot. We've seen some measure of traction with respect to women in the game, coaches being hired, officials now on staffs across the league, officiating games. Got a couple of women now in the fold. So what about the coaching ranks, though? That, I think, is where a lot of people feel, the hirings kind of came up short. David Culley, obviously, was a new add as a person of color, but where do you guys kind of forge the path forward, and do you have to change it in terms of the means and the initiatives you're trying to undertake here to foster a greater degree of change than we're seeing right now at the coaching level?
Because I would say daily conversation, and you nailed it, there was progress. And when you look at the totality, we didn't end up where we thought we would from a head coaching standpoint, but we do celebrate. And I think it's important that we acknowledge those who were able to obtain those leadership roles. You mentioned the 3 GMs. You look at Anthony Lynn. You look at where we ended up with some of the D'Amico Ryan. We made progress in a lot of different areas. So today we examine from the policies, from our identification of talent, the gender side. I mean, I'm still having a hard time putting my arms around why are we still having this discussion around inclusion and gender. Like, we're almost we just began 2021, and we still are talking about inequalities for women. Like, that blows my mind. This is where we as men, like, there are more men that believe in inclusion and inequality than those who don't. We just got to keep forging forward. So, hey, we'll re-examine under Deja Smith and Chairman Rooney's leadership. We're examining the policies. Anything need to be tweaked in the Rooney Rule? Anything needs to be tweaked in our anti-tampering policy? We'll look at the resolution that was submitted by Buffalo. It's a daily talk, it's a daily discussion. We think we're in a good spot based off of some of the things that were implemented a year ago. Again, didn't make the progress we did on the head coaching side, but we made a lot of progress in the hiring totality. But we got some work to do.
So, and we just heard this offseason that Maya Chaka becomes the first. She's going to be she's going to be a white hat, correct?
Yes. So she's a line judge. So it's, once again, we talk about historical moments. Come on, we need to normalize these things. I mean, Sarah Thomas had a wonderful season. She was the first female official. We got Maya, the first African-American. We got to normalize these things, which starts with presenting opportunities for both women and people of color. So again, we got to I'm gonna put the onus on the men that lead these organizations, that run these organizations. We got to get current. We got to become current in our thinking from trainers. We should be instituting women and talent across, forget color, but we should be looking for the best. But I'm happy about Maya Chaka. I mean, think about this. 101 years of football, Chris. We had our first black crew, week 11. Had another week 17 that most didn't notice. We got to normalize those things. We shouldn't be talking about that. Not in 2021. So it just shows you, hey, the National Football League, like other organizations, we got work to do. But if we want to be the premium sport and what we call the true melting pot of America, we look at our fan base. We could represent excellence. We could do that. We could be a model. We could be a living example of what it can be. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm hopeful. I'm happy that leadership is aiming in that direction. And I'm looking forward to this offseason.
And I know I don't have to tell you or Steve this, but sports in general, is probably ahead of the curve in most cases in terms of multicultural integration, because the locker room can be made up of just about anybody. But I kind of go back. It's almost a year ago now. It's crazy to think about this, but on the heels of the George Floyd incident, I know that our organization had Leslie Frazier get together with everybody on a Zoom call and kind of lead a Zoom call. And I know you know Leslie well because he was your DB's coach with the Eagles. But I got to tell you, Troy, it was one of the most eye-opening Zoom calls that I have ever been a part of. And I know Zoom was very young at that time. But, like, we were sitting down, and I think I consider myself a pretty well-rounded and cultured person in terms of respecting other people's cultures and backgrounds. But just the emotion that he brought to it was just so eye-opening, even for me, a person that grew up in the greater New York City area who was exposed to a wide variety of backgrounds just because New York is such a melting pot. The knowledge base that someone like Leslie Frazier can come from, I just think is such a valuable tool for this league to utilize going forward.
Yes. And Chris, we lived that out our sport. I mean, think about this, Taz. The one thing we know, when we're in the locker room, game day, the last thing we think about is color. Hey, when you were in that huddle, it was about Jim, Thurman, Andre. I mean, you would just think about, let's just make the play. Care who got the ball or what color he or she was. But the organization, all of our organization, you mentioned Leslie, each of our organizations are made up of great men and women. Sometimes we're not willing to listen and hear. We're at that place now. I think our society in 2020, there was a true turning and a true awakening for all. So each of our organizations have great people like Leslie, great players. We just have to be willing to listen and hear, because we do have differences, which are good, but we got to have civil conversation so that we can move forward.
Troy, last thing I got to ask you is about the coming season. You had a lot of work to do with yourselves, DeMaurice Smith, J.C. Treader, the union, and the league really had to work together this last season to get a lot of things done. Is there any issues that you guys still have to iron out? You don't have to give us details, but are there big issues that are – you just signed a deal, but you had to almost renegotiate it immediately to get the season going. What other issues are – first of all, from the league's perspective, what issues do you want to talk to the union about going forward, and what do they want to talk to you about going forward? What's the next thing on the labor relations front?
I don't think there's any issue, Steve, here. I think we showed last year, and I think, say, the year before last, you put a 10-year labor agreement in place. You put 256 games in 17 weeks. You had a successful Super Bowl. I think it showed all of us the power of collaboration and teamwork. We got through 256 games. If we can get through that, come on. Phase 1, phase 2 of an off season. You just signed a media deal, which is good for the game, for everyone. The fan doesn't want to hear anybody talk about millionaires and billionaires talking about paragraph 5 and who's making what. They want to see games. They want to start building their fantasy football team. I do, but there's no pending issues. Nothing that we can't resolve, or leadership. And I think this is what D and Commissioner Goodell has done. They forced, there's nothing like labor peace. And when you have labor peace, the pandemic is a great example. If you can get through that, there's nothing we can't discuss or we can't resolve. The fans want to see games. The players want to play, and club principal owners want to see the fandom that exists in the 32 cities.
Troy, real quick before we let you go, just getting back to our initial thing that we brought up, the NFL draft being in Cleveland. I saw NFL Network's Judy Battista did tweet out that we don't know yet in terms of how many fans will be allowed to congregate there and enjoy the draft over the 2 or 3 days. I'm guessing you guys are kind of at the mercy of what the municipal protocols are at that time come late April, so you're kind of in a holding pattern. Is that right?
Yes, and it's always been that way. Always go through CDC guidelines, state and local regulations, and then we go back to Dr. Seals and his team, and we adjust from there.
All right, very good.
Thanks, Troy.
Always a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for giving us some time today. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you both.
All right, Steve, we close this episode with a look at Buffalo's quarterback room. We were talking about free agency at the top of the episode here. The position of quarterback for the Bills, largely unchanged from last season, but the lone free agent is not returning. Matt Barkley was essentially replaced by free agent Mitch Trubisky, which I see as an upgrade in terms of skill set. But the discussion we're going to have here, Steve, deals with the numbers at the position. It's safe to say that Josh Allen and Trubisky are on the roster as the number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks, but in this week's edition of Something's Got to Give, what do we think happens with QB3 and QB4 in Davis Webb and Jake Fromm?
That's really interesting. If you're thinking about who you got to keep, it's not about so much about which one can play. I don't think. I think it's about which one gets the 1 guy and the 2 guy ready. And if the 3 guy becomes the 2 guy, can he do what the 2 guy is supposed to do? Get the number 1 guy now ready to play. Davis Webb has been valuable in that. We've heard about how he wants to get into coaching. He wants to be one of those guys. That gives him a skill set and a mindset and the reputation in the coaches' rooms that he's going to be that guy and play that role for you. I think that plays well. Same thing with Jake Fromm. He's been one of those kids that's real heady player,
cerebral,
not blessed with great physical skills.
No,
doesn't really have the arm or the height or the physical
traits.
Traits that set him aside as an NFL quarterback. But he's all that other stuff. So when it comes down to it, I think both Jake Fromm and Davis Webb, offer you the same. What are the other benefits? Is there a huge difference in salary, discrepancy? Are you saving a ton of cap space? Is one guy significantly better physically than the other? So if there is a train wreck and you got your fourth guy in there or your third guy in there, can you win? Can you even have a chance?
Yeah.
With a guy like Davis Webb, that's probably his saying, yeah, you probably can. If you're talking about who saves you the most money, it's probably a guy on a rookie deal, a quarterback,
You would
whatever.
think, fifth-round pick, yeah.
So you have to weigh all of that. I think as a backup, in those, I like veterans better myself. They've been around the block. They've been through different offenses. They've been through different training camps. They've been through different head coaches in the league. They've been in different organizations, and they've been there in, day out,
right,
getting ready to play. And they probably, maybe at some point, have taken a couple of snaps. Jake Fromm hasn't even taken a preseason snap. And he didn't even get in the room last year because they kept him separate.
Yeah.
I don't know how much he impressed him. Not knowing that, I say Davis Webb. But if Jake Fromm hit it out of the park in the role they had for him last year, maybe they say, you know what, let's reward him.
I tend to lean Davis Webb here as well because his physical, I think in terms of intangibles and getting the other guys ready, I think both Fromm and Webb are very good at that. Webb obviously has the benefit of more experience. He's seen more, even if he hasn't played all that much more than Jake Fromm. And I think Davis Webb's physical traits are slightly better than Jake Fromm. He's got a better arm. He's bigger in stature. He's 6'5".
He looks like
so
a quarterback.
He's got the edge, at least as I see it, but they could go to training camp and that could change. We don't know. So the next question is, do they keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster, do you think? Do they do that?
I think they probably do. Yes, I think you have to. This is a team that you can't get derailed when Josh Allen leaves for a month. You know what I'm saying? You got to have guys that can go. And you got to, at that spot, it's too important to me. It's too important. And plus, it's just one more guy that's there to help Josh when he is healthy.
I think if they decide to keep only 2, though, that could shift the balance of who the third quarterback is to Fromm, who we know still has practice squad time. I'm not sure Davis Webb does.
That's interesting.
Not to mention the fact that Fromm, I think you would feel safer that someone would not poach him off your practice squad as much as, say, a Davis Webb, if in fact he does have practice squad time. So if they only keep 2, I think it could change the balance of who they would prefer to keep, as opposed to the scenario we first posed, which was, well, if they keep 3, it's probably Davis Webb. It's an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, it may come down to, and maybe it always does, I don't know. I've never been in a coach's meeting where they evaluate this kind of stuff or with a GM, but maybe it does come down to non-football issues, practice squad capabilities, salary, instead of physical traits and the role that they're going to play. Maybe it just comes down to having a guy there that can throw to the scout team.
I know this. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
I mean, think about this. The roster is so deep here, you have to make a difficult decision for third quarterback. Just think about that for a second. That's what Brandon Beane and his staff have done with this roster.
It takes a lot of work to get to that point.
I mean,
they've put in some
that's
time.
pretty damn good.
They've hit on enough guys, no question about it.
But I thought that was an interesting discussion to have because that is coming down the pike here. And I know you're saying, I mean, there's probably some people listening to this going, all right, guys, we're talking about third quarterback in March, like seriously? But it's something that crossed my mind with the acquisition of Trubisky. The 1 and the 2 are set in stone.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see, especially knowing Fromm was a draft pick investment by this team. And they love Davis Webb. That's going to be a very, very difficult decision for them. I know it's not a super high priority decision, but it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, and I think, and like I said, the more we talk about it, the more I think it's going to come down to non-football issues. Practice squad eligibility and salary.
Yeah. All right, that's a good discussion, and I'm glad we had it. That'll do it for this week's edition of One Bills Lite. Please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you might be on so you know when our next episode drops. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. You know the deal. When there isn't enough time for One Bills Live, there is always enough time for One Bills Lite. We will see you next time, everybody.